And that is the reason, actually, that I'll probably never eat Taco Bell right before a wedding again.
Oh, my God.
Welcome to the Happily Ever Laughter podcast.
A positive space where we try to find the humor in the craziness of life.
Because life is crazy.
That's for sure.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Danae.
And now, on with the show. Welcome back to the Happily Ever podcast, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Danae.
And I...
You said that wrong.
What?
You said the Happily Ever podcast.
Did I not say Happily Ever Laughter?
I don't think so.
I thought I said it correctly. Try it again. Welcome back to the Happily Ever podcast, everybody.
You did it again.
Happily Ever Laughter podcast.
There you go. Good job.
I said it the right way twice, did I not?
Okay. We'll go back and listen.
I am very confused. Now I'm curious if we should just start over or just keep going live
Let's
because
keep going.
That's crazy.
Good.
All right. Welcome back to the Happily Ever Laughter podcast, everyone. I'm Matt.
And I'm Danae. I think we're a little out of it
That's true.
morning.
That's true.
Did you take your meds this morning?
I did take my meds.
Oh.
I don't know if they fully kicked in yet,
have.
but I took my ADHD meds and I just took a 5-hour energy. So either they're going to kick in halfway through this episode.
Oh, good for me.
Oh,
That'll be
yeah.
good. Oh, here we go.
But I've wanted to start doing just random jokey intros coming into the podcast.
Uh-huh.
So was that too bizarre today?
Caught me off guard. I think it's better when you don't tell me what you're going to do sometimes.
Oh, okay.
So just...
Well, I thought about trying to start
it.
just adding one of those to the beginning of every podcast.
Okay.
If you enjoy that, let us know on one of our social medias. If not...
You'll let us know too.
For sure.
So.
Also, another thing we're going to start trying is different segments throughout the show.
Yeah, we came up with some ideas. We're trying to play around with this a little bit just to give a little variety. But also, it's one of those things where when you sit down and try to write some like outlines for podcasts and stuff, sometimes it feels a little too structured.
Right.
But we also want to talk about maybe current events and stuff like that that's happened. So we're trying to figure out like, okay, how can we weave these things in? And we were like, well, maybe segments is a good idea. And we came up with some, but we're trying to come up with some ideas. So if you have any ideas for segments for us, let us know.
For sure.
What we should call these things. Because the only real one we've come up with so far has been, I'm so confused. Because there's been a lot of stuff happening the past few days.
Yeah.
And what was the one that you came across?
The reason the whole thing started is because somebody shared a clip of Jesse Waters on Fox News.
Uh-huh.
And they were getting all ticked off about, I don't even know what's happening on Fox News.
It's so
ever.
one of these things. It's like it's the outrage that's always so funny to me.
But they get so irate about
the dumbest stuff.
Yes, the most bizarre thing. So his whole tirade was, how did he phrase it? What type of man would
or
act?
his husband, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Specifically husband.
Yeah.
For what they were
type
talking
of
about.
husband would go to the grocery store and shop with his wife and go grocery shopping with his wife?
And he told me, I was like, I'm so confused. I'm like, a good one?
And I showed you the clip, and he seemed very pissed off about it online. And I'm going, that's what
like,
I want to be with you at all times. That makes no sense.
But it's also like, you're a grown-ass adult. You're going to go grocery shopping, and why wouldn't you go with your significant other? It just didn't make any sense to me. And I was like, I'm so confused why this is an outrage moment right now.
Well, that seems like those things, too, of so many people have kind of going, well, I primarily do the dishes and you primarily do the laundry, so we have a lot of stuff, but then we trade off on everything else in the house. So it's not like
our
I'm
whole
the man.
Yeah, is about being a married couple and making this life work together and having fun doing it, right? But at the same time, I don't understand some of these things because I'm like, for us, it works being a team and like going back and forth with like helping each other do things.
100%.
Or like if I do the cooking, you're going to clean up, or you know, if I'm doing laundry, you're doing dishes or stuff like that. It's like we share responsibilities, and it's not like we're, a lot of times I do say I would probably be the primary parent on some stuff only because you're out of town.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's like you share all the parental responsibilities and stuff like that too. It's like, I don't know. It's just so...
I'm so confused.
Why that was such a thing. So anyway, but that's just like one idea that we had for a segment, because there's this stuff like this outrage kind of stuff happening all the time, and it's just so dumb.
And there's so many things like that where it's specifically this is the male role and this is the female role.
Like,
and I know it's
I know they're trying to go back to that crap, but I'm like, so many of us have been raised not in that space anymore. So it's all kind of like, what? And all of the happy, no offense, happy relationships that I know, y'all share responsibilities with stuff in your partnership. So it's not like you only do this or you only do this, because that just creates resentment, I would assume.
100%.
You know, so I don't know. I don't get it, but it's just kind of funny to listen to some of these people go off on stuff.
It is. And some of the arguments and things that they determine outrageable. Mm-hmm. Is that a word?
I guess outrageable? It is now.
Yeah. Just blows my mind of kind of going, we have so many other problems happening right now.
Yeah.
That to be.
But it's like, really? This is what you're going to focus on? For sure?
Yeah. Which I think we kind of talked about it in the last one too. But yeah, this whole alpha male trend that they're trying to put out there is very confusing to me as well.
I also feel like it's not going to serve a purpose in the long run because, okay, we are raising children, we're raising girls, and we're raising them to be strong, independent, and, you know, with the relationship that we have is teaching them what kind of relationship they should look for. And no offense, it's not that kind of relationship.
Everything that I have taught them and showed them as a father is the exact opposite of half of that stuff. And it's a generation
of girls being taught this stuff, while on the other hand, it's like the guys are regressing. And I'm like, that's not going to bode well for the future if, you know, these guys are not rising to the occasion to actually pitch in and do crap. So that's kind of my hot take, if you will, on that kind of stuff.
Well, and since there is a big push right now to just make more babies so we have more people for more workforce, that's not going to happen if you have a lot of douche guys
and women that just like, I don't need that, you know. So we'll see. Well, I don't know. The world is kind of crazy right now, so we'll see what happens with all of that.
So if anything you learn from our podcast, don't be a douche.
There you go.
Brought to you by the Happily Ever Laughter podcast.
It shouldn't be this hard.
It should not be that hard to just be a good person.
Not be a douche.
Yes, and just be like a kind and empathetic and loving, supportive.
And a grown adult that can do things for themselves. I mean, that's really some of that stuff is just mind-boggling to me. It's like if you lived by yourself, you would do it. So why is it so different when you live together?
Yeah.
I don't get that part.
Well,
anyway,
that is a good topper to our segment. I'm so confused.
A tirade there. Anyway, so lots of fun stuff as well. Fun stuff and confusing stuff has happened in the past few days.
That's
it feels
true.
like a whirlwind. I don't know about everybody else, but a good
also,
thing.
If you have anything that you're confused about or you would be curious of our thoughts, put that on one of our socials as well, because I think we want to start doing more of these, which would be fun.
I had taken a social media break the past couple weeks because I'm just like, there's so much going on that I needed a break from it all and kind of reevaluate where I'm going from the whole, you know, TikTok ban to not ban to do I really want to keep going on all of these social media outlets?
But they saved the day.
Oh my
TikTok
gosh.
is back.
Anyway, how I feel about that, please don't make
Sorry.
Any gestures. You're online. Anyway.
So if you're watching that, you saw something inappropriate that I did, but if you're listening, just keep it that way.
Anyway, so I think going forward, we're still on most of the major social media outlets, but I think we're going to split them up and you're going to take care of a few and then I'll take care of a few. So it might be Matt answering some stuff and it might be me answering some stuff, but I just can't be on all of them. I just can't do it anymore.
Well, and if you're like us and you're listening to this right now, it's such an overload, specifically like what we just talked about, getting pissed off about
for no reason.
Husbands going grocery shopping with their wife. Our human brains were not meant to have 24/7 emergency catastrophes just hitting us in the face
and
nonstop. Outrage. So it's just so overwhelming, especially if you are empathetic to a lot of different things. That's just such... I mean, I know you and I, it's paralyzing.
It's too much energy to absorb on your own. Yeah. So we're going to split some stuff up.
Since Facebook has now come out now and started their, we're not going to fact check anymore because fact checking was politically biased. But
okay, I'm confused about that too.
Oh, wait, we can save that for another. I'm confused. My bad.
Anyway, we could talk about that one later. But anyway, some good stuff did happen if you're a Chiefs fan.
Ooh, yes.
Which We are, if you know anything about us, we
So
have
sorry.
been for a very long time. Did you leave your phone on?
I left my phone on and I forgot to turn off the air, so continue talking
Okay.
whilst I do that.
Anyway, yes, we are not bandwagon fans. We have been fans since, my gosh, you were young. Your whole family has been forever.
I grew up, we grew up in
So basically,
the
since
Missouri
we've been
area,
married
so
20
yes.
years, I've been a Chiefs fan as well. So, so yeah, we're proud of our guys. So we won't try to go into it too much because I know there's a lot of haters out there right now. And a lot of people think that stuff's unfair and whatnot. But at the same time, I kind of just I like Josh Allen a lot. And
I do
honestly,
like Josh Allen
if
and
it
love the
wasn't
Bills.
our team playing them, obviously I would be rooting for them.
Yeah.
Because they're just a good team and they're always hard to beat.
Yeah.
And so it's always a good game. You said something about that,
I
right?
saw a quote online the other day that was saying that the Bills versus the Chiefs is the most guaranteed ticket that you could purchase or go to because it always delivers. They always have crazy games.
It's always
comes down
back
to the
and
wire.
forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is any given Sunday with those two teams when they play these days. And so of course, I'm happy that the Chiefs are on top again, going for a three-peat, which is crazy as a Chiefs fan that's been a fan for as long as we have. Because everybody likes to hate on the winners, but and we did the same thing when the Patriots were going through their stretch.
Yep.
But at the same time, it's you gotta beat the best. That Josh Allen said that. It's like, if you want to be the champs, you got to beat the champs. So
yeah.
It just kind of sucks for everybody that's not a Chiefs fan right now.
Well, it's been crazy for us, too, just to give our backstory. Like Danae said, we've been fans our whole lives growing up. Like, I remember being little bitty and then, at one point, too, shows how narrow focused my brain is. Or now I'm already going off on an ADHD tangent, so here we go.
Which is the topic of our whole podcast for today,
Which
by the way.
is.
But we'll get to it.
It works out great. But I remember when I was probably 10 or 11, somewhere in there, and I had a soccer game on a Sunday, and my dad came up to me and said, "Hey, I have Chiefs tickets at Arrowhead. Do you want to go to the game?" And I was like, "Dad, I have a soccer game."
Your little league soccer game.
Yeah,
so much more important at that age.
Like pee-wee, not matters at all. We're all just running around in herds kicking the ball. But I was so sports driven and focused on that
you were like, how dare you
I blew
up?
off a chance to go to a Chiefs game, and that would have been my first one ever. And then,
oh man, at that age,
yeah. And then the game ended up being really terrible, mine, and we played very poorly. So I was pretty upset that I didn't go to the game.
I think it is funny. It is a different level of fandom too when you're actually able to go to a game, because I think that's where I kind of really solidified my fandom, and now everybody in the family makes fun of me because I'm probably the loudest person during a game watching.
That's true. Danae screams like a freaking banshee. We're like, ah!
The kids the other day watching the game, they're just like, they kind of crept into the room where we were watching it, and something happened. So of course I yelled, and of course instantly covered her ears.
I think a fumble happened. Danae's like, fumble! And they're like, ah!
So, and I was just kind of a casual football watcher. I mean, you played in high school.
Yep.
So I didn't really know the game that much and didn't really pay attention to it. My family was not into sports growing up, so it just wasn't a big deal to me and whatnot. But then we got married, and then we actually started to go to games. And
I don't think, it's till
experience Arrowhead in all its glory.
Or really whatever your fan base is.
Yeah, any stadium.
If you have not gone to your local professional team to experience the atmosphere, that's what's going to put you to the next level of fandom.
Yeah.
Because it's just such a fun...
what did we call it? Collective effervescence.
Collective effervescence.
It's kind of if you go to, a lot of people get it at church, but also like concerts or things like that. Anything that you're a big fan of, and you just have this community aspect to it, I think.
And you're all there kind of cheering in unison and experiencing it all at the same time.
That's why the Eras Tour was so huge this whole past year. For that same reason. It's just like this community aspect that goes into it.
We'll talk about it in the neurodivergence that we're getting ready to talk about, but we're that way. We're very hermit, and we don't like being around crowds, and we hate being around people. But for some reason, when we go to Arrowhead, it's 75,000 other similar people. We're all there for the same purpose. And so it seems more community.
Yeah, and that's
it
the
is
weird
a
thing,
lot
'cause
like going to church and stuff like that.
We don't like going to big crowds and things where it's packed in and stuff like that, but it's so different when you're going to something like that you enjoy. When we tried to explain that to Cameron, who is like very anti-crowd, and you took them to their first concert
I did.
last
We
year.
also, if you don't know, have a metal reaction channel, me and Cameron. It's called Matt and Cameron React on YouTube. So it's all super hardcore heavy metal. And if you don't like that, you're probably not going to like the channel, but you will like that I'm a goofy idiot watching metal.
And Cameron's our oldest, obviously. And so that's what they have bonded over. And so you guys started a reaction channel.
Well, and it all really started from this, honestly. So we could get into that. But yeah, so I ended up being able to take them to their first heavy metal concert ever, which was Sleep Token.
Which is a huge up and coming, well, not up and coming, but they've kind of exploded.
Yeah,
now.
They've now hit like the pinnacle, and they're starting to do all their sellout stadium tours.
And they're not
your
what you think of typical heavy metal. I listen to it, and I'm not a huge metalhead at all.
So this is the main guy's mask, if anybody is watching
singer.
Online. His name is Vessel, so they don't even have names. It's
all just persona.
Vessel 234, even in the concert. They call it Come Worship With Us, so it is like a church service. So they don't talk during the show. It's just song to song, and they're in there.
It's very theatrical.
Kind of, yeah. It's like a musical theater heavy metal show, which is pretty sick.
Oh my God. That's not what they sing. But anyway. So yeah, that was cool that you guys got to do that. But that kind of goes into what we're going to talk about today, basically, which is having a neurodiverse family. And I realized we should probably define that, because if you're not in it, if you don't have these either mental health issues or the way that you think about it, you may not have even come across some of these terms we talk about. So I was going to explain it a little bit. Yeah. So what does being neurodivergent actually mean? And according to Psychology Today, neuro means relating to the nerves of the nervous system, which includes the brain. So neurological differences or neurodiversity are the differences in brain structure, chemistry, and functioning that are associated with differences in sensory perception, cognitive functioning, and mental health. So all of this stuff can include things like...
Can you say that for somebody who does not understand all the things that you just said?
Things like mental health disorders like ADHD or autism or bipolar disorder. Things like that can be included in this stuff, but also things like giftedness.
Yep.
Having a very high IQ, or what are some other things that I was trying to think of? Just having those kind of sensory overload type things, which also kind of coexist with these kind of, whether it's a disorder or... Because that's the funny thing to us, once we started to get into things like this, because our kids have been diagnosed with some of these things, it's really when we really started to learn about it. And I've just kind of trying to help my kids just dived into learning about it. And then in the process, Matt and I were both like, oh, a lot of this is actually genetic.
It is genetic, and it gets passed on. And
we were really relating hard to some of the stuff once we started to learn more and more about it. So
being undiagnosed ADHD all the way until my 40s, essentially, was the first time that I ever really thought about it, because Cam, we've now realized, is ADHD, is on the spectrum of autism. Mm-hmm. And some of these things you start to,
and you start to see how difficult it is to get diagnosed and how stressful and frustrating the whole system is when you try to get help for this stuff.
100%.
Because it started for us back, basically, Cam was 6th, 7th grade when we were starting to really struggle with grades.
I think so.
And this had never been a problem for Cam before, right? Is your computer getting loud?
Yeah, it's getting, the fan is blowing really hard, so it's getting toasty, so I'm going to...
So yeah, back when Cam basically started junior high, basically the time where they start switching classes a lot and transitioning.
Yes.
Cameron started to struggle a lot. And we were like, okay, well, what's going on here? Because up until then, it'd been the classic, every single parent-teacher conference, they're like, great student, no problems, always top of their class.
Yeah, perfect in class, helps other students, so they're like having another small teacher in the class.
But when the transitions and puberty started, we started to see where things were starting to go wrong. And Cam became very depressed, and so we were like, okay, well, we need that was about the time where we were like, okay, we got to change what we're doing too, because what we're doing is not working. The way we were parenting, what we were trying, all the stuff that like how we were treated when we were growing up and how stuff was handled back then did not work anymore.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we started to seek out help.
Well, and there was like a definitive day too that we went to your parents' house and I saw Cam as a totally different person at that point, where I was like, what is happening? All of these reactions, and that's when all of the panic attacks and the real nervous stuff started happening.
But then when we started to go back and think about stuff, it's like the signs were always there. We just didn't know how to recognize it.
Truth.
Because nobody in our family had ever really been diagnosed with anything before. We were all just basically, as we know now, walking around undiagnosed, not knowing anything.
Well, and speaking of, I just started to go back. I just bought I can't remember what it's called. It's like a digitizer or something like that, where you can go back and take your old VHS tapes and you can make them digital copies. So I started going back to some of the early ones when Cam was 4 or 5.
Or even earlier than that, like 2 or 3.
Well, and even when Cam was little.
Sensory issues was always an issue.
Yes, but being a comedian, the hardest thing for me was Cam never laughed at me. Like always just looked at me and studied.
Very,
and was just
very observant
very
child.
watching everything. And
like
then it was
taking
when,
it all in.
Yeah.
Like when they were just a baby, you know? And then it was...
And then there was a video that I was watching that kind of brought it up too, where a thunderstorm was coming in and I was filming all the kids and they were all kind of eating their Cheerios and coming around. And Cam's like, I don't like thunderstorms. It's loud and it wakes me up and I can't sleep. And it was very...
They were like 5 or 6,
yeah,
you know, and just very matter of the fact, this is how I feel. There's always the classic, we tease your dad about it now, but he was always like the classic grandpa wanting to be involved and taking them everywhere and stuff like that, which is great. But at what
and
Cam,
he's always
Cam
like,
would be like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
As like a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And so it was funny because at the time, I think it did hurt his feelings from time to time. But now that we understand everything, and it's like, that's just the way that Cam's brain works. There's just, you know, and we realize now that's typically the autism, the on the spectrum kind of stuff, those kind of ways of thinking. They're just very logical and, you know, matter of fact.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like Cam was trying to hurt anybody's feelings or anything like that. It's just the way their brain works.
It was a very legitimate, and so it's become a running phrase that we've said throughout our lives now, like us and the kids and my parents and everybody, because, you know, he would bother her, and my dad likes to mess with us, but in a way that's very loving. It's not like I'm messing with you, but always like,
he just likes to tease and prank a little bit and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so at one point, Cam just said, Cappy, which he goes by Cappy because he wanted to be called Captain Steve.
He didn't want to be a grandpa.
Yeah, he didn't want to be grandpa, so we call him Cappy.
Yeah.
So it was always, Cappy, leave me alone.
Just very matter of fact like
that. But it was more like, leave me alone.
Yeah, with little voice. Yeah, we've been going through, because Cam's about to turn 18, getting ready to graduate high school. And so we've been through a lot with him, particularly, but it wasn't just Cam. We've noticed, obviously, Chloe is our middle kid, and then Cora is our youngest. And we all have issues, like our whole family. We've realized this. And it got easier once Cam got the diagnosis, because then we were like, oh, now we can go to therapy and figure out how to actually handle this. And it's helped the entire family.
For sure.
So, you know, stuff like
like when we were younger, we were, they call the term masking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll come up with some of these words because I realized, you know, we wanted to go over this because it gives context to who we are as people, but also how we've changed our position or our opinion on how to deal with certain things, or just life in general, for that matter. And I realize a lot of people that aren't going through this personally may not know what any of these terms mean. So we'll try to define these a little bit more.
So it's kind of like me being a professional entertainer. Most people know me or remember me being young, acting the way I do now on stage. Mm-hmm. But that's just a mask that I'm wearing because I've realized there was some trauma and stuff that I went through when I was younger, you know, with my sister had cancer and we went to St. Jude a lot growing up. So there was a lot of times
where... And you were what, like
I might have
12-ish? somewhere in there, 10?
10.
When it all started happening.
Yeah.
So you had to grow up pretty fast.
Yeah.
And similar with me, I had a sibling that passed away when I was really, really young. So there was a lot of us, both of us, we grew up pretty fast.
Yeah.
We kind of had to.
Well, and I realized that humor was the thing that I was really good at, and I could make other people around me laugh. And that was my trigger to be like, hey, if there's ever an uncomfortable situation or there's a tension in the room, you know, I've always felt like it was my job to be like, hey, I'm going to do something funny and help everybody. So people started only seeing me with that mask on.
Well, it was a defense mechanism for you, too.
Yes.
It was, one, a way to get attention, and two, a defense mechanism to, like, protect yourself, too, a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's what masking is basically how you act in front of people because of whatever reason. We've realized now a lot of times it comes from trauma. For Cam, it was not only growing up undiagnosed with ADHD and autism, and a lot of that was you too, just learning how to act right in front of people, quote unquote.
Well, think about it this way too. So masking would be if you've ever been in a situation where you're having a conversation with somebody and you do the first sentence, let's say, and then so it's a question, and then they're answering. If you're ever in your own brain trying to think about what they're saying, but also go,
how do I
hey,
respond?
is my face giving the correct emotional response to what I'm trying to portray right now to this person? Because at the same time, you're also in your own brain trying to go, okay, am I a real boy? Am I acting like I should be right now? You know, if somebody gives you a present, you have the right amount of surprise, or you have all these things. Those are different masks that you try to throw on to be like, hey, I need to
act a certain way
act
in
a certain way
place
in this situation
or with certain people.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself like feeling like you need to act a certain way in front of different people, like let's say friends versus figures of authority versus like teachers or people like that, or you're practicing conversations in your head or in the mirror when you're alone.
But we
like
all
that.
have different versions of that too. So, at home you are you. And
hopefully some people aren't that lucky and don't feel even safe to feel like that, to be like that at home, which I feel like now we realize that's why we clicked so well. Even when we met, we were 14, 15 when we met and we're friends, and then we started dating. And we've just always been like that because we have been each other's person that we could unmask around without feeling any kind of
self-conscious or any of that type of stuff. Because at work, you're going to do it. I know our kids specifically, and if you're listening to this, you probably have kids that do the same thing. They go to school all day. They're perfect at school. They do everything right. The teachers love them, and then they come home, and then they're crazy. But that's because they've masked so hard all day to be that good, proper student.
And you just run out of energy to maintain it. And that's where a lot of people get to, especially when you're on the spectrum, particularly. But this happens a lot with ADHD because comorbid is another term when these things all happen together. And so when you have your brain functioning on a different level than it feels like the rest of the world, you can have these different things overlap, and then you end up in something called burnout because you're expelling so much energy to be a certain way where you need it, whether it's your job or school or whatever, that you're just completely burnt out by the time you get home and you have no energy to do anything for self-care. So a lot of kids, especially if you suspect this for your kids, I guess, so this is coming from our perspective of what happened. If you start noticing just a drastic change, like they're starting to become depressed or something like that, this is something to consider because it's one of those things, especially if they're really good or they're trying really hard at school and then suddenly grades are starting to drop, starting to get depressed, starting to get panic attacks was what was happening with our kids a lot. And it can just be the way that they're just expelling so much energy trying to be quote unquote good that it just falls apart everywhere else in their life,
Well, and think about it this way. I had a friend that told it to me at one point a long time ago. And I know you guys know this example too, but like using batteries, of kind of going like, my social battery only goes so long until it's depleted. And then at that point, I can no longer fake that I care about listening to your conversation or your whatever. And at that point, that's when you're just like, I I don't have enough left in me to mask anymore. And that's what a lot of kids are doing at school.
Yeah.
They're using that battery all day to by the time they get home, they are just gone. And I've realized introverted and extroverted people tend to recharge their batteries around people. So being around people gives them more battery life, and it recharges them, where I'm the opposite. So like when I perform, or if I'm on Disney cruises and I've just done a show for an hour and, front of 1,500 people, and then you sign autographs and you say hi to everybody, that's always awesome. But by the time that last person leaves the autograph line, I'm done.
Yeah,
and
your battery's out.
I'm like, I need either something to eat or just go sit in complete silence in my room for a little bit to recharge some of my battery, because that's the hardest part for me, is to just go, 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 go.
And that kind of analogy has really helped our family a lot, because even in situations where we're having like family discussions or family arguments or whatever it might be, we can just honestly tell each other, hey guys, my battery's out. Can we talk about this later when we're a little bit, have a little bit more energy to put towards it? But even if you don't ever deal with these things, but you have a family member or friend that does, maybe this can help you understand where they're coming from a little bit better. And they're not trying to be like a bad friend or trying to be contrary or mean or anything like that. There's just literally no energy left for it. So I think that can help you have a little bit more compassion for people too.
That's also how you know you're tight with somebody. If they are comfortable enough to tell you, hey, my battery is toast, I just can't do this right now, they're opening up to you to tell you something that they probably wouldn't tell somebody else.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
In our situation, it's just like you just kind of grin and bear it and get through it. But specifically with Cam, there came a point where it just was impossible. And this is where we had to get him into therapy. We went to see a psychologist, and this is where the psychiatrist actually was the one that diagnosed him with ADHD to begin with. Yep. And then we started to discuss the medicine route and everything like that, which I know is really difficult for a lot of people, especially when you're talking about your kids or younger kids. Medicine seems to be a very taboo subject sometimes. And of course, go the route of trying, all of the things that you can try non-medicated first, like either therapy or exercise or, diet, stuff like that. It can make a difference.
Well, and a combination of all of those would be even...
When it comes to things like ADHD, it is a chemical imbalance in their brain. And medicine really, really can help. And it's like, you wouldn't deny somebody with diabetes insulin. So think of it like that. Don't pretend this isn't a thing. If you get an actual diagnosis, especially, and you've seen a doctor and everything, get a second opinion if you think you need it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this medicine, you, for example, how different has it been?
I am a mood swing person if I'm not medicated, now that I know what it feels like to be medicated and to feel and to focus like normal people do. Because I think for so long, when we were growing up, the way Cam is now, it would have been, and that's why we tried that at the beginning. We tried to be like, suck it up, rub some dirt on it, go outside.
Try to make them more resilient.
The things that we always had when we were younger, being like, go get your energy out somewhere else.
But it wasn't hyperactivity with Cameron. It literally went to panic attacks and severe depression.
Yes.
So, and you can't suck that up sometimes.
Yeah.
That's a serious thing. And so, maybe trigger warning here, but we did have to have the talks, and there were, the suicide talks and lots of stuff that we went through to get Cam to the point where they are now. So it can escalate quickly, particularly in that age range, particularly if you're talking about girls, because we realized through this whole process, Cam is non-binary, but also female biologically. So it's a challenge because we've realized the diagnostic criteria for a lot of these things is only based on boys. And so a lot of times, like myself, I probably have all of these issues as well, because like we said, it's genetic, and I do relate to a lot of the issues that the rest of my family does, but I've never been officially diagnosed, even though I know I've got it. But I have realized through this research, through going through the system and trying to get help, that it's like none of the diagnostic criteria up until about 5 years ago, even included research on girls. And so there is like a whole generation of women my age that have never been diagnosed because it's just missed. Because most of the time girls present differently than boys do.
Yeah.
Boys get the hyperactivity a lot of time. And so when you got diagnosed for ADHD, that's what they were looking for. But in reality, you can have inattentive ADHD, and that's when it's all in your head. Like you cannot focus. Cam used to describe it like my brain is like a pinball machine, and I cannot figure out where the ball is going.
Yeah.
So, and it, at one moment it would focus on one thing, and then it would go to a different one, and then it would go to this one. But the also funny thing about it all, and I wish they would kind of rename it, and I've read this in a lot of people's experience as well. It's not necessarily a deficit in attention, because you can get hyper-focused. That's another word that we've come around.
I cleaned the garage for like 9 hours yesterday.
It's not that they don't have the attention span to do stuff. It's that they cannot focus it. And that's that's the disability in that kind of situation. It's not that you don't have the ability to do well and to focus on things when you want to.
Yeah.
It's that it's hard for you to channel it, I guess.
Well, and that's something that and it's so eye-opening and crazy once your kid goes through one of these things, because once we started figuring out what was happening to Cam.
And by the way, Cam has given us permission to share this whole stuff because they want to be an advocate for it as well. So
Cam's
maybe
even
we'll
talked
bring
about
them
coming on the podcast and talking about their whole situation and stuff like that too. But yeah, so Cam had a just snowball of everything.
And because we didn't know anything, it was so much more difficult, I feel like, than it could have been. But we tried to stay open-minded about it all.
Because it was undiagnosed ADHD, undiagnosed autism. They came out as non-binary. Like all of these things hit right at that puberty time. So it was such a shift in personality and all of the above. And then having Cam go through some of those things majorly opened my eyes to a lot of things specifically in my life personally.
Yeah.
So like I have a story, which I guess I might as well tell. It's not my proudest moment, obviously, but I knew the moment that things were wrong for me.
Like that you needed really help.
Yes. As we came home from a family function.
It was a very stressful day.
Yep. We were potty training Cora, who was really little at the time. And I didn't realize it, but my ADHD and your
anxiety, because you've been diagnosed with anxiety now too. That's the only official diagnosis I've had, which I could get into a whole nother podcast episode about how women get diagnosed. But my official diagnosis has only ever been generalized anxiety and depression. Right. But I don't think that's where it comes from. It comes from the other stuff.
Well, and that's the funny thing too, speaking of Cam, is when we started taking Cam to get diagnosis, here's how far behind. We're in Missouri, and we're very low on the mental health ratings around the United States.
Yeah.
Which is so frustrating, especially when you see your kids struggling and there's not a lot you can do about it.
The resources just aren't there.
Yeah.
Or they're behind the times very badly.
But the first time we took Cam in, might be why they're such a good actor too. They're going to school for theater and all of that stuff. But their masking was so good that the doctor goes, well, no, Cam can look me in the eyes and they can speak like this and they can do this. So
there's no autism.
Those are all signs that they're perfectly fine. But that was just that Cam had learned to mimic so well and on how to act in public.
Knew how to act to be presentable.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot specifically with girls too.
Because a lot of stuff now is just really focused on hyperactive boys. Mm-hmm. And so...
Even autism is the same way with the diagnosis criteria there. And I've realized it's very challenging as they're younger. Unless they're a disruption, they don't get diagnosed. And that underserves so many people like our other kids.
Yeah.
So...
Anyway, bringing it all the way back around to my story, that really was the kind of a turning, like a fork in the road for me. We came home from this family get-together. It was a very stressful day. We were potty training our youngest. They ended up just being frustrated, and then so they just peed on the floor.
But it's you all have little kids. It
all
happens.
Those things. None of that even matters to the situation. But my anxiety and ADHD, I never realized, but mine all came out in just kind of rage fits.
Like anger.
Anger, because essentially, and I never knew how to describe it until we started going therapy stuff or looking at things, but I would get so much energy in my body that I just like don't know how to get it out, to where I'd have to hit something or throw something or yell or do one of those type of things. And then, so this day was...
Which, in all honesty, I don't want people to think badly of you or anything that. No. Because it's not like he's ever been violent with any of us. It's been on himself. Like, he'd go punch something.
That's the funny thing now, is looking back on it. Like, even in high school, I would hit myself in the head, or I'd hit my head on things.
And Cam would do this at school with the same things when they were having meltdowns. And you were like, that's when it really started to trigger with you.
But I never really knew that that's why I was doing it. It was because I just had so much frustration and energy, and I didn't know where to place it. So it'd be like, oh, I gotta
and it would
get
just
this out of my body. And so that particular moment, I went in the other room, and that's like you just said. I would never.
You would usually just excuse yourself, but then go out to the garage and like punch the punching bag or something like that.
Yeah.
You know.
So I got a punching bag for the garage specifically for that reason, to be like, I don't want any of this stuff to happen in the house, so I'm going to go out there and also stop breaking things. Because I had like a lawn chair that I broke one time. And I'm going, why am I breaking stuff? I can get a punching bag. Mm-hmm. But this particular occasion, like we talked about before, battery was gone. We got home, all of the things happened, so I kind of went in the other room, and we had a changing table on the dresser that was padded. And so I just got really frustrated, and I hit that 4 or 5 times, just getting it out of my system. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, ooh, well, that doesn't feel very good. And then I looked down, and like my bones in my hand were not in the right direction. And my pinky was kind of dangling, and I go, we might need to go to the emergency room. And then you were not happy with me for a while, obviously. And anyone listening would be like, oh, shit. That guy needs to chill out.
I think that was probably the first and last time I didn't speak to you for like a solid 2 hours. And I took you to the emergency room.
Think about that, though, too. Because how many people listening to that, for us, that's a long time, 2 hours. Yeah. And some people are going, I don't talk to my spouse for all days. Yeah. No. That's not how we are.
But
like,
we don't
so
fight
tight
and stuff like that. You know, and I understood, but I was also going through my own stuff, and I'm just like, I cannot deal with this right now.
Yeah.
And if I said anything to you, I think it was like, you've got to get your shit together.
Yeah. Well, and I think you knew because
you've done that to me before, in all fairness, because there has been times where I had gotten into depression really bad, and you had to come to me and be like, you need help.
Yeah.
And so this was my moment to tell you, okay.
Well, specifically with Cam, you had very bad postpartum depression.
Yeah.
But you couldn't see it yourself. So there had to be a point where eventually I had to go, hey, you are making me nervous, and I don't know what to do, and I need to help you somehow.
Yeah. And so this was a like come to Jesus moment for both of us.
Like a reciprocal, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you could also see it on my face that you knew
instantly you were
at that moment.
regretting.
I go, this is farther than I ever should have to take anything. So something is not just me getting mad.
Yeah.
Something else is happening above and beyond where I'm at mentally. And so having Cam in those situations and then going through this, that was a big eye opener for me too, of going, oh, well, this is what has happened because of, yeah.
Yeah. And it has been interesting because it's one of those things, like that was the catalyst moment of you going to the doctor and getting your own diagnosis. But it was also just eye-opening to us to try to help Cam. We both started going through therapy as well. And it's just like, gosh, how different would our lives have been if we'd known this earlier?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you and I did some couple stuff, even though we didn't need it, but it was more of a...
we wanted to go through the process of therapy and how it worked and everything like that before we tried to put our child in it.
Yeah, we didn't just want to throw our kid into therapy without us having experienced it first and knowing.
Now that we've gone through it too and talking with a lot of friends that are psychologists as well, it is when your child is having problems and they're like, they need therapy, a lot of times they also say the parents need to be involved because 90% of the time it's coming from the parents, whether they have not dealt with their own stuff or they're not contributing helping the situation if they're not willing to go to therapy too.
And ours started because of that, where we got to a point where we go, we don't really know what to do in these situations anymore. We don't know how to handle this. Nobody, I mean,
and everything we were trying was just not helping.
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of times when you become a parent, nobody gives you the playbook and they tell you what to do in these certain situations. They're just kind of like, everybody have babies, and then good luck.
This is the hardest part of just having that age group, the teenagers or the preteens, getting into all of that is just, there's so many books written about the baby years and the toddler years and all of that stuff, and so much advice, but not for that age group.
Yeah.
And it's just like one day it was like a flip switched, or a switch flipped.
Yeah, there you go. I got confused too.
Yeah. And it was just like, I remember you saying, it was like, it just feels like a completely different person. I don't know how to talk to them. And I think that is where I'm most proud of us as being parents, is we decided to change, and we decided to admit what we were doing was wrong and admit that we needed help.
Yep.
And a lot of parents don't ever do that.
Well, and you hear a lot of the kids too, or parents that are like, this is my roof, you're going to do what I say, and everything goes through me. And we realized very quickly with Cam,
we don't know shit.
Yeah, we're like, that can't be how our life is. Like, we want to be more connected and better parents.
Help them.
And
honestly, it was, I don't want to sound dramatic, but it really was a life and death situation at a couple points. So we had to change, or Cam wouldn't be here anymore. And I do firmly believe that, and it's very hard to admit now, and I would say they would agree with that too. Like, if we hadn't gotten them the help that they got when we did, who knows, and we have had friends whose kids have done such. And it's you never think it's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
You never think your kid is going to have these issues. And you just hope and pray that you do what you can to try to connect with them, I guess, especially at that age. Because I feel like growing up, your kids think parents, for the most part, you hope that they're, you're their go-to and end-all be-all, but there's so much outside stuff that happens these days. And also with us, it was the internal stuff that was going on that we didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
So we took the wherewithal to figure it out, and recognize that this was not out of our hands, but this was bigger than us, bigger than what we knew what to do.
Right. So it wasn't just I'm the parent, do what I say. There were reasonings of why Cam needed the medication, needed the therapy, needed the all of the above. And that flipped everything. Like, our relationship with our kids now honestly really blows my mind, because we're so tight and our kids are so tight. And it's like, it's just a crazy thing of, sitting around the dinner table, or we've had times where, one of the kids' friends have called and said, hey, we're doing a sleepover. Do you want to come hang out with the friend group? And they're like, nah, we're going to watch a movie with my parents.
Which is crazy.
So
but that just shows you how introverted our kids are too.
Maybe that's it. So, maybe we're just teaching our kids to become hermits.
No. But it was interesting in how we had to change our parenting too, and each kid is different. And we have really now, especially as the older two get older as well, what works for one will not work for the other. Even though they have similar issues, it's handled in a completely different way. And like right now, we're trying to figure out, we recognize some stuff happening with Cora, who we try to get evaluated, but for the same reason I'm saying it's out of date. And I say that it's very frustrating, because kids usually will not get a diagnosis unless they are either failing in something or being a disruption, because they take into account not only what is happening at home, but also at school or wherever they are most of the day.
But Cora is perfect at school, so nobody would ever see it. But then by the time she comes home,
her battery's out.
There is a lot of similarities to what Cam went through. So we're
we're trying to help her with what we can and what we know, despite having an official diagnosis yet. So that's incredibly frustrating, but also what worked for Cam does not work for her.
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure that out with her and her own personality, even though they have similar issues. And we recognize now that this is probably what's happening. It's handled in a completely different way. So, yeah, that's the fun part we're going through right now. And then there's Chloe, who is on the gifted side, which honestly, they all are, but Chloe was actually diagnosed and put in the gifted program.
Well, all three of them,
which is basically having high IQ,
yeah.
And it's a neurodiversity as well. But they don't diagnose that as a disability. But unfortunately, we see a lot of areas where it is. Like, so Chloe could never get a 504 plan with that for like helping her with disruption.
Which a 504 plan, for those of you who don't know, is like it gives you things that you might need at school. So if you need to wear,
or work or wherever,
if you need to wear earphones to drown out the noise so the sensory overload isn't too much, or if you're in class and you're like, hey, stuff is just elevating too quickly and too much, I need to step out for a minute.
Can I go to the counselor's office?
Or can I take a test in another room? Like certain kids
stuff
get
like
those.
That.
Yeah.
Or you go a step further with kids that have a further disability, and then you go to the IEPs, which usually will cover things like autism more, because we've also realized that it is a spectrum. That's why they call it a spectrum, because there's high needs and low needs. They used to call it high functioning and low functioning. But they're trying to get away from that
because it really isn't. It's all
day to day, honestly, with these kids.
Yeah.
One day, like it has to do with battery, like you were talking about. One day they might not need as high a needs as another day. So it's very confusing.
There's certain days where Cam is 100%
totally fine.
Everything's great.
You never know there was an issue.
Other days where they're just a full on like robot, zoned out, talking like this.
There were days before, at school where we had to come and get them from school because they were just in a room banging their head up against the wall.
Well, and luckily, I say luckily, but it's also not at all, because if this shit really happened, it would be so infuriating as a parent. But I remember a fire drill that happened one day, and luckily the school ended up calling us, but they did the fire drill. Cam was in another room taking a test by themselves. And so they did the fire drill. Normally, when you hear the alarm, you know what to do. You go outside, you get wherever your station is. But the way Cam is, or the way Cora probably would be, that instantly sent them into panic attack and overload. So they just hid under the desk.
And when Cam specifically,
and nobody even knew that they were in there until they got back, and they go, oh, we found Cam still in the building, hiding under a desk because of the alarm. So we realized at that point, and luckily the school started seeing that there too, where they kind of go, hey.
They witnessed it, so it wasn't like just us telling them, hey, they're having these issues. Because when Cam still does, frankly, it just doesn't happen as often anymore, so that's lucky. But when Cam goes into panic attack mode, they very much go into freeze and can also get to the point where they're nonverbal and they cannot move or speak.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very difficult to help them if you don't know what to do. And even us as a family, it took us a while to figure out what helped and what didn't. Well, but that's what would happen at school, like the fire drills or something like that. We got the 504 plan and we had to put stuff like that in it, as far as like what to do when there's a drill if they go mute or they can't move. And trigger warning, this has always been a huge fear for mine if there happened to be a school shooting, because you never think about those kids. You don't think about the disabled kids that maybe can't run or can't hide. Like there's kids with Tourette's that cannot help but make noise.
Yeah.
And I wish people would think about that kind of stuff more. It's like, so that's where things like that would happen at school, where we're like, we really, really need help here. And having the diagnosis helped.
Well, and eventually what helped us as a family too is when Cam would get nonverbal, we've actually started coming up with catchphrases or like words, or
Cam is learning sign language.
Yeah, some sign language stuff. So there's certain times where if Cam does go nonverbal, they'll kind of do like a zipper across their lips. And that kind of just means I can't talk right now. But they're still able to... Like
they could text, they just can't speak.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that would happen a lot, and it was happening at school, and we got to the point where we took a semester off school and homeschooled for a bit.
Yeah.
until they got out of their burnout. We were talking about the burnout earlier. And sometimes when it happens like that, you can do something that's called like unschooling, which is basically we had to completely reset their nervous system, and we took a few weeks off of everything.
Yeah.
Literally just let them reset before we tried to get back into school and stuff like that. And we worked with the school the whole time. And now, obviously, they're back and doing great, and it's blowing our mind a little bit, getting ready to graduate and doing the whole college process thing.
Well, and speaking of, let's go ahead and bring it back around to how well Cam is doing. Cam went back to school, and their major love is theater.
That was the trigger that made them want to go back to public school. Because at first we were like, maybe this, and we understood it at that point with everything that was going on. Most of Cam's problems was because of the sensory overload that was happening at school. The noise, the disruptions, the not able to focus in class because other kids were being disruptive.
Well, and their first hour every day was banned.
So it was noise.
Instantaneous, just and then that's how every day started. So it's hard to get your battery in the right spot if you're already starting in a deficit.
And they started school at 7:30 in the morning, which is already really early for a lot of people. So yeah. But we realized over time that it was like, well, that was the big triggers. Because at first we were going to be, well, we'll just homeschool from now on and we'll figure this out. But then we were invited back to go to the theater thespians banquet.
Yeah. Well, and luckily, I think Cam was away long enough to recharge and gather themselves.
And we were going through therapy highly at this point, too.
Yes.
So helping them figure out what was going on and how they, absorbed everything, basically.
Well, and the only big city closest to us is almost an hour away. So at least once every week we were driving to therapy for that. And it helped so immensely. But it got to the point where Cam is a senior this year and actually was chosen and starred in a play about an autistic kid. And the play was specifically chosen because of Cam. And in the play, there are panic attacks and meltdowns. And man, it just emotionally broke us every show going to watch this thing. And then we'd have other parents coming up afterwards going, Cameron was amazing. Like that breakdown scene. And I don't know how many parents don't realize it though, until
you see your kid overcome something huge.
Well, but we're also in the back going, no, it's not real, but this is really what Cam goes through. And so people would be going, holy crap, that performance was amazing. I'm like, yeah, but that's what we see behind closed doors.
And I have to give it up to a lot of the staff at our school too, because we had some very good support staff that helped us through this whole process with them. So they got to the point, they came back to school, started in the play. They're like vice president of thespians. And it's just been like, we're so thankful because it could have ended such a different way.
Yeah.
And I encourage anybody that is having trouble with their kids like that too, or themselves, go to your doctor, go get a therapist, try to get help because it could so much help. And so we're going through the process with our other kids now too. Is like, we're trying to recognize when is the point, we need to get them extra help too.
Yeah.
If they need it. But yeah, it's so funny to us going through all this as a family and then being able to talk through it as well, as a family and understand where each other's coming from. Like I think we mentioned this in another podcast about how well our kids communicate with each other. Yeah, like when they have disagreements or stuff like that.
Because Cam actually now, I think because of this, wants to go into
becoming a therapist.
Theater therapy.
Yeah.
And do theater stuff, but therapy for theatrical.
For stuff for people that are struggling.
So Cam comes home, and then sometimes the kids will be fighting, and then they'll all the three of them will get together, and we'll be in the other room, and we'll just happen to hear them, and they'll be like, hey, when you said this, it makes me feel like this, and they go, oh, well, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. So they're already doing their own little therapy sessions. Yeah.
So it's been pretty funny with a lot of that stuff. So
But we've created now with our changing of parenting such a safe environment for the kids, which is what we've always wanted all along, for them to never be afraid
to come talk to us about
tell
stuff
us anything
when they're struggling. I think Chloe came in last night, was venting to us about something.
Yeah.
So it's, I like I said, I feel like if there's anything that I'm proud of us being parents, is that it's just fostering that we know our kids aren't afraid to come talk to us about anything, really.
Well, and I know people that, and I'm not saying mine was that way, but I know a lot of kids grew up afraid of their parents or things would happen. And I think we
started off that way, I think, in some ways.
Yeah. But then we realized we don't want to be those parents. And so we changed our entire philosophy of how we parent based around our kids. Well, and so now we rarely...
It's made us better people too, because
for sure.
Learning about yourself can help you communicate better with other people too. I feel like, because there's a lot of times where people will put their needs aside, or the opposite, they'll put their needs in front of everybody else, and they never even try to communicate. But I feel like we've really, really, really tried to learn about all of these situations, what neurodiversity means, how we all have these different issues, but also how we can come together and work through it all, and basically respect each other from all of it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a lot, I think, to go through. But
and
at the same time,
if anybody has any more specific questions about neurodivergency or stuff like that, and you want us to do a follow-up podcast, and you have questions, find any of our social medias. We're on almost all of them. We're all Happily Ever Laughter Podcast, or we're Ever Laughter Pod, I think, on Blue Sky.
Yeah, the new one.
But yeah, you can find us in a lot of places. We would love to have more conversations like this, because we know there are parents that are struggling through these situations that we have now
we're on the other side of
and been through. So we're on the downward slope, at least with one kid.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're in the thick of it, but also we've gotten over a hump too. So just sometimes being able to talk to other parents that have gone through stuff like this is incredibly helpful. I know it was for me, being able to talk through some stuff with people that have gone through similar issues. But
we joined some Facebook groups that are, inclusive that way as well, that are people going through similar situations. So there are multiple outlets of where you can find information if you see something with your kids or a family member or your spouse or even yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have to bury it down and be, like for me growing up, to be a man,
you don't talk about emotions.
You couldn't show emotion. You couldn't let anybody know you cared about them.
That's why you focused it into anger, I think, because that was the only acceptable emotion for a guy.
Honestly, that might be true, and I didn't even
ever
think
put that
about
together.
That.
Yeah,
because you're not allowed to cry, or you're not allowed to show compassion or empathy or all that stuff, which is why I think all of this stuff now, going full circle back to the beginning with the alpha male shit, just really bothers me, because I'm like, that is not.
You're not going to live your life in a good way
if
that's all you're focusing on. But anyway.
And if that's who you think you should be as a man, then I think you're also closing yourself off and alienating yourself from a lot of people, because...
A lot of good.
Yes.
A lot of happiness, too. But anyway, we started this podcast and we call it Happily Ever Laughter because obviously we're married and we do like to find the humor in a lot of things.
Yes.
And sometimes some of these topics are not necessarily the most fun to talk about or funny. And how do you find the humor in all of it? But
we want it to be real and honest, and this is what we went through. And
we're not going to lie to you about stuff or, sugarcoat it either sometimes if we're asked. So,
because like we said earlier about there's no playbook for parenting.
Yeah.
If there's anything that we can do, if you have somebody going through something, you can send us an email as well. And we can just kind of go, here's what happened in our
happilyeverlaughterpodcast@gmail.com.
happilyeverlaughterpodcast@gmail.com.
But anyway, I think that's about, we'll probably wrap it up here. We could talk forever on stuff like this, but thanks for hanging out with us. And hopefully that was informative.
That's true.
Or at least get to know us a little better and where we're coming from for a lot of this
stuff. If you have made it all the way to the end, please feel free to go to whatever podcast, or if you're on YouTube or whatever your absorbing this content through. Like it, leave a review. It's going to help other people find us. We would love to grow this community back to where even it was at our first podcast iteration, but now we're on number 3, so we're kind of starting from scratch. Over. But now everything looks better, everything sounds better. We're older, we're more mature.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, yeah.
I still love poop jokes.
Oh my gosh.
Always.
We don't need to get into that one. So thanks for hanging out with us today, guys. I can't even talk anymore. We've talked a lot.
Yeah.
We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye, guys.